Director Daddy?
Present.
Director Finch?
Present.
Director Thielke?
Present.
Director Whitman?
Here.
Chair Hages?
Here,
Thank you.
stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we'll start with director comments. Peter, do you have anything from around the world here?
Well, I can report a little bit about Senior Canyon. We got wiped out with roads and our main supply lines back in January 9th. Got those band-aided back together. And then once again, on the 24th, we were hit again. So we're kind of back to square zero. And we are involved with FEMA because the cost of repairing the road, basically a lot of the dirt just was washed away from the entrances to the North Fork and West Fork, our two main sources up there. So we are still responding and changing. Now more rain, and it's kind of a moving situation. Always, whatever we fix may be gone in another week or two. So while the rain is wonderful, Senior Canyon having struggles just making sure we're not taking any water from Lake Casitas and just trying to keep our own sources. So that's it.
Hey, thank you, Peter. Jim.
OWCD did meet. We have elections coming up. And similar to OBGMA, I went in and met with LAFCO. They're looking at us. We're looking at ourselves for the LAFCO purposes. And given the inoperability of the spreading grounds, it kind of puts a big, question mark in what we are. And I don't know whether it's something that we can actually use as leverage over the county part, that county part of Public Works using LAFCO as an additional hammer to get the spreading grounds operable. So we're undergoing the LAFCO, and process similar to this. So then let me speak to the spreading grounds, because I don't have any official reports from Glenn Shepard, but I did talk to the technician who operates the downstream at Grand Avenue Bridge monitoring point. They were able to get 3 acre-feet in to the spreading grounds and get a test done, which is good because it gives the data that's needed for the various federal agencies. But at the conclusion, now it's my understanding that the river has scoured to such an extent that it would take 100 CFS to get up to the inlet to it, whereas it's supposed to be 30 CFS that are bypassing it when we can start taking it. So, and I have not been able to access it yet. So I have not seen what condition the thing is in, but none of it sounds good ultimately. And the entire monitoring weirs and devices at Grand Avenue are completely covered up. It's silted in. So that's what I have.
Thank you. Andy? Steve Oheim?
Yeah, so we've got a general plan revision and growth management plan revision coming up. So we'll be looking to OBGMA to help us with some of the water data there. I don't know how quick that's on the radar, but it's coming for our review.
All right, thank you. Bob?
Lots of comments. People very happy with the water. Very few people actually got flooded out, which was pretty much of a surprise. Surface water. Comment over and over and over and over and over again. The most asked for thing was real-time public access to the basin water level. If there wasn't a way that there's a website where people could go to the same thing they go to at Casitas, see what the flow is, the inflow, see the height, if we couldn't do something like that for the basin. So that's my major.
All right, well, Lake Casitas is still coming up. We average, I think, a little over 1,000 acre feet a day for quite a few days. And we're at 125,400 acre feet as of the last report at 53%. And we've come up, I think, something like 45 feet since the beginning of the year. And with this kind of rain, we'll continue to come up well into the spring. So it's about as good as you can get. Okay, general manager comments.
I really don't have any comments.
Okay. Jordan, basin status report.
And now what you've all been waiting for.
85%.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair Hages. Today, pleased, I heard as good as it gets earlier. That's certainly on the agenda. Today I titled the presentation March to Artesia, and that doesn't mean you're taking a walk to Orange County, but it does mean that the month is here and we are marching along towards artesian conditions because it is certainly historically wet winter. Year-to-date rainfall totals, over 31 inches on the valley floor, close to 60 on the ridge tops, and we're still in the beginning of March. What does this mean? With that 31.34 inches on the valley floor to date, we're close to 150% if rain stopped now versus our longer term average. But the normal to date is about 16 inches. That's 194% thus far, normal to date. Last year, this time, we had 11.87 inches, so we're almost our average above last year to date. Well, how has the basin responded? As Jim mentioned, the surface water was continuous flow from late December through late January, and then it stopped flowing continuously across the basin. But with the February 24 storms, it continued again and hasn't stopped. It's beautiful. We probably have more picturesque opportunities today than we've had since yesterday. It's picturesque valley, wet or dry, in my opinion. And when it's wet, it's really just blooming. Snow-capped peaks in the background and or underfoot if you're lucky enough to hike up there or it comes to you. But it's really, the flows into the basin are tremendous. And the flows out of the basin are not insignificant. We'll talk all about that. So what does this mean? So every month or so, and sometimes more frequently when it's exciting like this, we'll take measurements of surface water inflow points. On Monday, the 6th, we measured about 31 CFS at Gridley, just across the other tributary where it becomes San Antonio Creek. We measured about 38 CFS at Senior Canyon. Thatcher, we measured about 24 CFS. At Reeves Creek, we measured 11 CFS. These are the major ones that are entering the recharge side of the basin and recharging the main portion of the basin, the main aquifers. There are, of course, McNeil Creek and Stewart over on the west that also provide some surface flow into the basin, and of course some things coming off of Black Mountain to the south on the upper Ojai side. But these are the ones that really make the bulk of the inflow, which if you added that all up, comes to about 104 CFS. That's a lot of water. We also measure the surface flow out. Now, Montgomery, or Stewart Canyon drain, or Fox Barranca drain, whatever you want to call it, we measured about 8 CFS on that Monday. None of that is calculated into the input for the recharge. But the surface flow out of San Antonio Creek was only 17 CFS. So what does that mean? If we do that math, our net recharge was 84 cubic feet per second when we took this measurement, a snapshot measurement, on March 6, 2023. Well, 84 CFS, do we know what that is? Is that something we all can relate to? We have an idea about what CFS means as far as where you can divert to the spreading grounds or maybe to Casitas. But in plain English, that's about 37,700 gallons per minute entering the basin at that time, or 54 million gallons per day, 166 acre feet per day. It really boils down to the sustained that of about 17,600 acre feet recharged year to date. And because that's a snapshot of surface water infiltration, it's not based on that data point. That 17,006 is more based on the basin's response to groundwater and storage. In the recharge area by the spreading grounds, the loggers that we monitor in the depth of street monitoring well on the north side show this pattern over the course of the last 2 years. Really not much at all reaching that portion in the past couple of years until that January storm. That's that big peak on the far right side. That's the left spike. And then that decline is the recession as that recharge reaches the main aquifer system, and then we have the February 24th spike. That's the farther right blue spike on this curve. You can see it's just smaller in magnitude. Those are meters on the right side for the y-axis, and it's a significant maintenance since that time. In the main aquifer, this is what the raw data look like over the longer term since 2017. What's interesting about this is that the logger has moved up and down a little bit, so these are not absolute, but you can see in this graph the acceleration of the 2023 water year. It's just shooting up at a steeper rate, a more rapid rate of rise, accelerating faster than we've seen in the entire time we've had loggers in this well. This is at the Elrod well. Down on the discharge side, in the southwestern uppermost saturated zone of the perch system, it really mimics the surface water flow. This is the past 2 years of data, and you see last year's peak, short-lived relatively, and then the slow recession throughout the fall and into the early winter of 2022. But when we started getting those precipitation events, the response in that portion of the basin in the perched aquifer is very, very rapid, and then it tends to recede rapidly as it discharges to San Antonio Creek. This is the spike initially is the January one there in the not the furthest to the right, but the next furthest. That's the January events, and then recession, and then the February 24th event, with which we're still seeing a significant amount of discharge. The depth to water in these wells in the perch systems, it's 3 feet, it's 2 feet. It's very, very, very shallow. I like showing this one because it really shows that meteoric rise in water levels. This is something I downloaded just this afternoon. This is the Elrod well today. You can see how far apart those dots are, each of those being a data point. It's really dense. This is all of, you're looking at years of data here, but I wanted to show this just for comparison to how rapid that rise is since these storms began. More absolutely, this well, Elrod, is technically a well 5L5. It's not 5L8, which is the well that's technically on the corner of Thatcher and Grand. That one, I measured a depth to water of 114 feet. In the Elrod well, it's 87. So there's a 17-foot difference there. And that's something that we'll bear in mind as we continue to monitor this information in this wettest of years. But in the last 24 hours, we had over 2.5 feet of rise in this well. And we're able to monitor that in real time here now and report it accordingly. As Director Daddy mentioned, getting that to the website can be key. We've had the privilege of at least giving it to the Ojai Valley News every week. So on the front page of the paper, you can see, similar to Casitas, how much water's in the basin and what the levels are. But this is definitely the highest acceleration rise since we've had a logger in this well in the past 10 years. On the bigger picture, this is where we're at. As of today, 86.35 feet to water. In that Elrod well, we're probably about 83% of capacity, or 66,400 acre feet. Based on the accelerations that we see, we're probably going to have shallower than 50 feet to water in this particular well. Probably shallower than 50 feet. Our historic is about 40-something, 30-something, 38.2 in April 1978 in the 5L8 well. This is the 5L5 well where we're 17 feet difference today. So we could have near artesian flow at this key well this year. We'll see. It's a march toward artesia. In the 2021 to 22 water year, we provided this to DUDEC in support of the annual report. Interesting information here. It's almost out of date. It's almost obsolete given the current conditions. But it is a good track record and it's very key for reporting. And of course, we're able to pull this off of the logger data that we have. What you'll notice here is that we have the Elrod well, the Hansen well, the South Central Depth Discrete Monitoring well, and the San Antonio Creek Spreading Grounds well at our disposal here today. We also have historically monitored the Lago Marcino well and the Topa Topa Ranch well number 5. And I just replaced those loggers today. So those will be continuing in those portions of the basin logging at the same intervals of about 3 hours per. Down on the discharge side, this is what it looks like. Again, pretty picturesque. If you look closely, you can see our tape strewn across the transect. And this is where we collect our data. It's flowing about almost 3 feet per second coming out of there. And that's where that 17 CFS is measured across that transecting cross-section. Of course, coming out of the west side of the basin, and mostly underneath the southwest uppermost saturated zone, we have this about 8 CFS coming under Creek Road there. Over the long term, we've been monitoring this since July 2019, and it's pretty rare that we've had anything over 1 CFS flowing out of that side. We had a 2 CFS, almost 3 at the end of April 2020, but we're measured 18 CFS on the San Antonio Creek side and 5.6 CFS on the Montgomery Creek side at the end of January, and then Monday's 16.92 and 8.27 respectively. Zooming in on that, here's what those data look like. Compared to December, early January, and then 24th of January, 18.12, and Monday's nearly 17 CFS. These are, of course, snapshots. We're not collecting the peaks here. The county gauges are doing a great job of that, and that will let them report on those once the data are no longer preliminary. We've had loggers in this creek system to measure the surface flow, which is highly effective when we can do it at a high frequency and high degree of accuracy, which is the inverse of what the county gauges do. When it's low flow, they're less accurate. Unfortunately, when you get a big flow, our loggers go too. So we actually lost a logger from the system. And by the way, the creek changed its course. The channel in which we monitored the creek flow is different than it is today. It moved over to the north and is a nature of a braided channel. When we zoom all this out and back in, top curve, daily rainfall in inches, you can just see how intense that is. Really, high flows, high precipitation. Daily rainfall was a little bit higher there in the 2017. That February had a little more significant flow as measured, but not by much. What's interesting is you see the double peak in continuous flow. That's the light blue curve in the center graph. We see pretty high peak observations of about 7,000 CFS at Old Creek Road on San Antonio Creek, but quickly drying up and not having that surface flow anymore until the January end of January, and then we get the February 24th storms that bring back a significant flow again. We're measuring those pink X's. That's the 18, 17 CFS that we've measured here in January and February and March, and the absolute elevations that you see here on the left, showing how significantly high the water levels coming in the key well on that dark blue line, and the sounder measurements that we're taking near where my arrow is today. That's of course higher than where the outflow point was. As it was rising, the creek flow was still receding, marching downstream and lower elevation. In the perch system is the yellow. In the depth discrete monitoring well at Fulton Street, that's mimicking what's going on in the surface flow more directly. So, returning soon after 12 years, artesian conditions, and then I get a call today that somebody thinks they've got a leak at their well. So what does that mean? Today's the day. So this is down at the, where the Woolsey house is, Theodore Woolsey house. They put this well in a couple years back. It's about a 400-foot deep well, and it does have a pretty deep seal that seals out the entirety of the perch system. So this well is actually flowing artesian as we speak. It literally just started, and we would expect this to continue both in this well with pressure and flow out, but also as we continue to observe these, I hope that some of the stakeholders can call, hey, my well's flowing artesian. Let's take a note of that. Let's take a note of where it occurs and how much it occurs and when it occurs, so that we can add this to the data set. Just in driving around, I didn't see many others that were clear artesian conditions. There were a couple leaky pipes that I saw, but this is the first documented artesian flow. It just barely trickling out, but enough to coat that casing.
Where is this?
So this is just south of Ojai Avenue and just west of San Antonio Creek, in the southeast side of the Theodore Woolsey house.
So is that on Boardman?
It's west of San Antonio Creek. So on the opposite side of the creek from Boardman Road. Yeah. So this is where the oak tree fell down.
The house right on, the old house on the creek.
Yeah. Beautiful old home, and they've got this well that they drilled recently to replace another well. But I got the call that this was potentially leaking and artesian, to check it out, and sure enough, it is. So we expect to see more of that, and it'll probably get noisier. Questions?
Any questions? You know offhand what the difference between the flow at Camp Comfort and the confluence is?
As I sit here today, I don't know exactly. If we go to the county website at Old Creek Road, let me refresh this and share again. The current observed flow is reported 349 CFS. That's a bit high. Actually, in this case, the HPSF model is probably more accurate, which is the one on the right. Let me move our gallery to the other side, and it's showing that we're about that 24 CFS. This is at Old Creek Road. That's probably more accurate. I think that I'd agree with that 24 CFS. But again, that's their modeled information, and they'll process that. I can get over to Camp Comfort to answer your question. Do the same exercise here. In real time, the radar says 177 CFS. That's probably pretty high. But the HPSF model, which is probably more accurate, is right around 13 CFS. So that's pretty close.
Okay.
So we're picking up a little bit more water from the Lion Creek side and other tributaries as we get toward Old Creek Road.
All right, thank you. Any questions by the board? Any questions by the public?
While Jordan's weighing in as the geologist, Bob, you made a comment, and I think that we've got to keep in mind that we're talking about things that are geological and minutes and hours aren't really relevant to our basin. I think, once a month reporting on basin levels. Otherwise, there's so much static in these numbers that I think it's important to keep the public, and I think I've said it before, geological time is relevant in these matters, and I think that once a month is plenty, and trying to provide anything more, I would even question Jordan on, the transponders more than once a day. I don't know that you can overload ourselves with data rather than getting to relevant data. And while you're weighing in, and this is just a difference of opinion, what in your world is standard or relevant?
Well, in my world, I think every piece of data can be relevant. And it depends on the scale, and it depends on the audience, and it depends on really the managerial decisions. I think you're right. I think that from a standpoint of basin management, hey, we know we've got a lot of water right now. Let's wait to the peak. Let's see what we've got, and let's manage from there. Let's see how the recession will occur once we reach that peak. I think that's important from how much water should we take from Casitas? How much water should we take from our wells? How much should we take from the basin? How much recharge capacity do we have? All those decisions, I think, can be made in that short-term time scale. From a purely scientific standpoint, I think there's a lot of value in very frequent transducer or data logger monitoring points, because it really allows us to take that peak point and that nadir point. And in years like this dawned on me, let's say the basin fills, like to absolute capacity, to where all recharge is rejected. Now, will that happen? It depends on how much rain we get. If that basin actually fills, is not taking a drop, that 84 CFS that's coming in Monday has nowhere to go. The sponge be full. Well, when does that happen? And what happens to the groundwater levels when that happens? Well, people have tried to model that, but if we're measuring that in real time with 90-minute or 3-hour intervals of recorded high-frequency data, and we see the top of that S-curve, sponge be full at 36 feet in the key well, and it goes plateauing for a day, a week, a month, I don't want to guess. And I don't want to count on any model to do it. I'd rather measure it. And at the same time, measure the discharge in the creek. And that's important, because when those change so rapidly, when and how and the rate of change, that's my world. So both is the answer to your question, Jim.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Jordan.
Thank you.
Next item is public comments. These are comments by the public on items that do not appear on tonight's agenda. Are there any public comments? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to action items. Item 7A, proposal for GSP support services from DUDEC. John?
Yeah, last month I had asked DUDEC to provide a proposal to OBGMA so that we could have ongoing service support from DUDEC. The reason for this is current agreement that we've had with DUDEC was only for developing the groundwater sustainability plan. But as time is going on, we have continued work and continued support, and people are requesting data and information. And DUDEC's been very helpful in providing that, but technically we don't have a contract for services. So what this does is, if the board is interested in accepting this proposal, it will allow us to use DUDEC on an as-needed basis, and we'd pay their rate. What we'd recommend doing, though, is if we have a specific project under this, or something's going on, we can get a cost estimate from DUDEC, and we can certainly make sure the board's aware of that cost estimate. So I am recommending approval, and we'd certainly keep the board informed of the expenditures and any proposals that come forward under this work.
Any questions? Bob?
John, is it possible to include somewhere in here some type of a future schedule or graph? When I look in here, it says you've got to do XYZ report every 2 years. Then you have to do this other report every 5 years, and have something that shows us what we're going to be facing on a regular basis.
You'd like a timetable?
Yeah, sometime. I mean, we can't get a timetable because the governor weighed in, a few weeks ago, and he made a new timetable.
Yeah,
But the ones that we're expecting through the different agencies over time.
yeah, there's as you know, we have an annual report that has to go to the Department of Water Resources. There's also a 5-year update on the groundwater sustainability plan. It also has to go to the Department of Water Resources. And then at the end of 20 years, we'll have to also update the GSP to reflect what's happened over the last 20 years. So those kind of things. And we can get you some dates related to that.
And didn't we have a 2-year that I read in here?
I don't recall. Trevor, do you remember if there was 2 years?
I don't remember 2 years, but John, you're right. It's every year there's an annual report. There's 2 also data submittal deadlines to DWR. Those are spring and fall groundwater levels and information pertinent to the GSP needs to be uploaded to the GSP portal. So that's semi-annual, there's the annual reporting, and then there's the 5-year evaluation as well. And we can prepare that timeline and I think largely build on what was presented and included in the GSP to do that.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. We have data submittals that have to be done a couple times a year as well. We'll make sure you get that information.
Any other questions? Any questions from the public? Oh, Jim, did you have no? Yeah. Any questions from the public? I have a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Call the roll.
Director Daddy,
Yes.
Director Finch,
Yes.
Director Thielke,
Yes.
Director Andrews,
Whitman?
Whitman, sorry,
Yes.
and Chair Hages.
Yes.
Thank you.
Item 7B is a GSP activities report.
Trevor, you want to give us an update on
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of lead into Devin's gonna take over here, but it's gonna be a little bit of a shift. Jordan provided a really exciting, interesting
For some
update
reason,
on
you're
current-
garbled.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Give me 1 second. How's that? Can you guys hear me better now?
Think so.
Okay. I'm going to kind of shift it over to Devin. He's going to give an update on the annual report, but it's going to be a little bit of a shift or change in pace. Jordan just gave a nice update on current conditions in the basin. The annual report looks back at what happened over the past water year. So It's really an update on groundwater conditions as they relate to GSP-related activities and management. And Devin's going to take it over from here and give an update on what's happened in terms of basin conditions, groundwater usage over the 2022 water year. So I'll hand it off to Devin from here.
All right, thank you, Trevor. Can you all hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay. Well, as Trevor mentioned, we'll be talking about the annual report. And this annual report is for water year 2022. So the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act requires submittal of an annual report to the Department of Water Resources by April 1st of each year following adoption of a GSP. And the purpose of the annual report is to provide an update on basin conditions, including groundwater level trends, reporting of groundwater extractions and surface water use, and also provides an estimate of change in groundwater and storage. The annual report also gives the GSA an opportunity to report to DWR any progress on GSP implementation. So the annual report is organized in the following sections, which we'll be discussing today. So before getting into the data of the annual report, first need to define what water year is and what is meant by the spring high and fall low as we talk about it. So water year 2022 began on October 1st, 2021 and ended on September 30th, 2022. So that's the period that we're going to be focusing on here, and really at this point it's historical. The spring high is represented by March measurements in the Ojai Basin, typically around the early part of the year. Generally March is when groundwater levels are highest, and then the fall low is represented by December measurements. Usually November, December is when groundwater levels reach the seasonal low in the basin. So this graph shows total water year precipitation and cumulative departure from mean precipitation at the Ojai weather station. And as the graph shows, looking at the last couple water years, water year 2020 was an average water year, as shown by the blue bars. Water year 2021 was a dry water year, as shown by the orange bar, and a water year 2022, which is the report that we'll be talking about today, was also an average water year. And there really hasn't been a wet water year since 2005, except for maybe this year, we're getting it back into a wet water year.
On this graph, can you move the pictures over to the left so we can see? Because this was the one graph that I questioned.
Let me go back.
Just hide the participants for a.
Yeah, let me.
Okay, there you go.
Now blow it up a little.
Now go back to presentation mode. If you just go back to presentation.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. All right.
Can you see the graph again?
Yes.
Okay.
So on this, mathematically, it seems like over the course of that time frame, wouldn't you start at 0 and end at 0 on your cumulative thing?
That's the standard.
So that's my point. If you're doing it over a period of 1905 to 2025, and you work off of your average, and you do it cumulative, mathematically, you'd start at 0 and end at 0. And they end below
so
0.
Y-axis on the right-hand side is 0, and
Correct.
You can look into why it's not starting at 0, but yeah, I believe you're right. It should be.
It should start
be
at
close
0
to
and end at 0. And
Yeah.
yours never even goes below 0, which isn't correct either. Because it definitely back in the 20s and it looks like it should go down there, and probably recently also.
Yeah, we can look into
Yeah.
that.
I
I
don't-
think for purposes of today, just looking at the general trend, the trend isn't going to change. We can look at that scale bar and respond to that
Yeah, I think
question.
mathematically, you got a
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Appreciate it. We'll look into it. But the average precipitation over that period has been about 20 inches a year. And looking at those most recent water years, we've had 2 average years and a dry year most recently, with 2022 being an average water year.
Yeah, I don't have any trouble with the bars.
Okay.
It's your line graph.
Yeah. Okay. We'll check on that. Thank you. So moving along to groundwater elevations, in the GSP, several wells in the basin were identified as representative monitoring point wells where groundwater level minimum thresholds were established. And these minimum thresholds were based on historical low levels in the basin. So when we're comparing the fall low or the December measurements to those minimum thresholds, we look at that difference and see if how the levels are for a given year compared to those minimums. And for water year 2022, which the low in that period was December of 2021, all of the levels at the representative monitoring points were above the minimum thresholds, ranging from about 9 feet at the San Antonio Creek Spreading Grounds monitoring well to over 100 feet at some of the other wells. And just looking beyond, so fall of 2022, that would be December of 2022. It's outside that water year 2022 window, but again, looking at those levels, they were above the minimum threshold. So groundwater levels remained above all minimum thresholds across the basin. Moving on to groundwater extraction. Groundwater extraction in water year 2020 totaled approximately 3,527 acre feet, with the majority of water, about 55%, being used for agriculture or being pumped from agricultural wells. Water year 2022, groundwater extraction was close to 1,000 acre feet less than the previous 2 water years, as shown in the bar graph there on the left. But should be noted that the data didn't include a few wells that may have not reported, which could account for some of that reduction. But overall, it looks like it was there was less pumping in water year 2022 than the previous 2 water years. And the pie chart on the right-hand side just shows a breakdown of water use by user, and this is based on how the well is categorized. So again, agriculture being the biggest, the second largest use being for the Ojai water system, the municipal wells that pump for that system, followed by domestic wells and a few other municipal and industrial wells in the basin. And so this map illustrates the general location and volume of groundwater extractions, with the larger circles representing areas with higher rates of groundwater extraction. And as shown in the map, the majority of pumping is in the central part of the basin. Surface water use in the basin is Lake Casitas water that's imported by Casitas Municipal Water District. And in water year 2022, imported water totaled 2,578 acre feet, with 325 acre feet of that being used within the Ojai water system, and 2,253 acre feet being used within the basin, but outside of the Ojai water system. and looking at the trends based on the past couple water years, it was water year 2022 was similar to 2020 but was less than 2021, and with 2021 being that dry water year, which makes sense. So then if we combine the groundwater extractions and surface water use, we get a total water use in the basin of about 6,105 acre feet. And this being about 1,500 acre feet less than water year 2021 and about 500 acre feet less than water year 2020. So another component of the annual report is this calculation of groundwater and storage and the change in groundwater and storage both annually and cumulatively. Change in groundwater and storage was calculated using this linear regression model that correlates the spring groundwater elevations measured at the key well 5L8S in the center of the basin. The correlation between water levels at that well and simulated cumulative change in storage from the Ojai Basin groundwater model. And that correlation is shown on the right-hand side in this graph, with the Ojai Basin groundwater model depicted by the black line, the regression model by the gray line and dots, and the measured water levels in the key well being depicted by the blue lines and dots, and you can see the close fit there. So using that regression model and estimate of groundwater and storage, the 2022 annual change in storage was a positive 934 acre feet. And looking back to our starting period, which was spring 2014, groundwater and storage in the basin has increased by about 4,541 acre feet. And so those changes are shown visually in this graph here. This is showing cumulative change in storage with groundwater extractions on the left-hand y-axis, and cumulative change in storage on the right-hand y-axis. The gray bars show groundwater extraction, and the black line shows that cumulative change in storage, showing that slight increase from water year 2021. And lastly, there's a section in the annual report on GSP implementation progress. And so since the GSP was submitted, ongoing work in the basin has included continued stream flow monitoring in the upper saturated zone and primary production aquifer, and also continued monitoring groundwater levels and stream flow throughout the basin, as Jordan reported on. Additionally, a Proposition 68 Round 2 grant application was prepared and submitted on December 15th, 2022, and this application was to obtain funds for implementation of projects and management actions that will help the basin, help management and manage the basin and maintain sustainability. So with that, take any questions, but that provides a general summary of the annual report. We're still working on the report, but should have a draft ready for review next week.
Any questions by members of the board? When is this due?
It's due by April 1st.
Are we gonna have time to review the final draft, or do we have to?
I think Trevor just said that, he said he should have a draft available next week.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, not Trevor.
Yeah, that's correct, John. We should have a draft available next week. We just received most of the data for this report. So if we threw together this presentation and we just need to button up the report, and if we receive any additional transducer data from Jordan or streamflow measurements, we'll incorporate that information as well.
So as soon as we get that, we'll get the copy to the board.
Do we need to take a formal action on it or not?
I think it would be good to do that, but that means you're gonna have to have a meeting at the end of the month to do that, or a special meeting at least.
Well, we have a meeting scheduled for the end
Yes,
of the
we do.
month, but that's cutting it right down to the last day.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the 27th.
Maybe we could approve it with any edits that Jordan approves and the corrections that Jim pointed out. Can we do that?
Yeah, yeah, we'll make sure that we get that out to you as soon as possible.
So are you looking for a motion to approve it pending edits?
Yes,
And then we could, if we meet in time, then it's clear to go.
yeah.
I'll make that motion.
Do I have a second?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is there anything in the report that talks about what the sustainable forecast is, or how much water is in the basin to meet the needs for how many years? In other words, a real high level, not in acre feet and not in complicated numbers, but something generic. How many years worth of water do we have in the basin based on this average annual demand supply mix?
I don't know if you heard that.
13.
I think a lot of that was addressed in the groundwater sustainability plan. The annual reports looking at long-term sustainability, what the activities have been for the last year. Did you hear that, Trevor?
Sorry, it is a little bit muffled as well. I was the question, is there somewhere in the text that describes based on current storage in the basin or current water levels and average recent demand or sustainable yield, how many years of safe yield or sustainable yield is left?
Yes.
Is that the general question that I heard?
Yes. Sorry. Yes.
Okay, there is not currently. We can add a general statement like that, but John, to your point, that is described in the GSP, and the point of the discussion of minimum thresholds and measurable objectives and water levels is to provide that context of, hey, there's 100 feet of groundwater and storage before any type of undesirable result is
Speak up.
reached.
And if I recall, I think the groundwater sustainability plan estimated about 4,100 acre feet a year is the sustainable withdrawal.
Yeah, that's about right.
So I was just wondering if that could be included in the report somewhere?
Well,
We
the
can add-
sustainable withdrawal is in the
I know
report.
It's gonna change all the time based on what the supply is, but I'm just curious. No, you don't want it in there?
That's what's,
It's sustainable, so it doesn't change.
Yeah.
I mean, over millennia maybe.
I think the annual report only looks at a snapshot of a year. At the 5-year point, I think that's a point where we'd be saying, okay, back when we did the original GSP, does that sustainability number change? And I think then we'd report on that. And then, of course, 20 years later, we'll be looking at, well, is that number still good?
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of the timeline, and it was talked about earlier. The basin isn't dynamic enough to change that number from year to year. So we really need
It
to,
would just be nice to see what it is at that, as a snapshot in time.
But we've done this with Lake Casitas, and you say, well, here's how much storage we have, how many years of supply do we have if it never rains? That's kind of what you're talking about. Well, the sustainability plan isn't based on that.
Fixed in time, I understand.
Right. I mean, you can do the math, 41 acre feet, and look at the storage and do the math, but,
So do the math for me.
well, it's full.
66, so you got 14 and a half years. But Chair and Trevor, if you'd listen to this, I've heard in a number of different meetings, and I don't know why, and I haven't read any source on this. It's something that we have, well, we got 66,000 acre feet now. We'll probably be closer to 80. But I've heard we wouldn't be able to draw all of it, maybe only half.
Right.
Where did that language and what brought that up, or how does that occur?
Well, I think there's a minimum level in the plan that's based on historical lows, so that would be the minimum, I would assume.
Okay.
That's what the 4,100 acre feet sustainable yield is based on. But it's kind of we've done this with Casitas, and you start talking about, well, how much water do we have? How many years supply do we have if it never rains? If it never rains, we're going to have to move. If Lake Casitas was full, we'd only have 10 years of supply. So I think using the average sustainable yield for both sources is really the best. When we get really low, you might want to address that question, but at this point, I don't think it's relevant. Okay, sure.
You have a first.
We have a second?
Second.
Call the roll.
Director Daddy?
Yes.
Director Finch?
Yes.
Director Thielke?
Yes.
Director Whitman?
Yes.
And Chair Hages?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, next item is 7C, is a LAFCO municipal service review. John?
I'll just give you a brief introduction. Local agency formation, in this case Ventura County, and each county has a LAFCO. They do municipal service reviews. They're not done every year. They're done on an as-needed basis. And it just gives, most of the time it's a report and just an overview of the agency that they're looking at. But I have seen these municipal service reviews also be used to consolidate agencies and to disband agencies. And so I think it's important that we make sure that we get proper information to LAFCO and we can show that the agency is justified and there's a real reason for existence within the county of the agency. So I've given you a copy of their draft document, and there's a lot of holes in it. Needs a lot of feedback and information, but I wanted to make sure you're aware. They wanted to try and get something to their commission, I guess, this month, but I'm not sure that's going to happen at this point. And so with that, I open up for discussion, and the board's got comments. And I did receive comments from former director Russ Baggerly, and I think I emailed to all of you, so you've seen that.
Okay. Bob?
Okay, since I cut and pasted their document, it appears that we're close, but we're not precise in a lot of areas. We're not precise in metered wells, total wells, extraction, a number of things. Says the management plan was from 2018. Says that we're missing years of audits. Any of that stuff actually factual? Because, boy, it's like a shotgun effect.
Yeah, the audit has been an issue. The board did approve somebody a couple of years ago. They've been working on it. Roberta, I don't know if you've heard anything of late from the auditor, but they have not been responsive, and I don't think we've paid anything at this point. But it's been difficult to find an auditor willing to do the books on an agency this small. And I want to think the Conservation District has some of the same challenges. And so years ago, apparently, it was my understanding that the county used to do the audits for these small agencies. And they don't do that anymore. So, if we can get some assistance, get somebody to say, hey, here's an auditor, And hopefully, we try to do this every 2 years instead of every year. And so, and everybody seemed to be satisfied with that, but it's been, I think the last one we got done was the 2016-17 audit, I think was the last one.
Is this proposed bookkeeper somebody that would be capable of bringing these audits forward? The one we're looking at hiring now?
I don't know that.
Yes, and she can work with our auditor, Cindy Fanning, which she's still plugging away. It's just getting her documents. So it'll be complete. It's a work in progress, but it is progressing.
Yeah, the problem is we keep getting behind, is they don't bring forward these audit reports that we requested to have done, so. Because by the time this gets done, we still got 2 or 3 or 4 years of audits left to get caught up on.
Melissa has helped out a lot too with that.
Okay.
I would think we should do, I mean, part of the problem of getting an auditor is it's such a small job that they don't want to do it. But if we do 4, 5, 6 years worth of audits all at once
Yeah, it might be worth
and
it.
get caught up.
Yeah.
And, maybe if the conservation district's having a similar problem, we could work together. Yeah, package them together.
It would be greatly beneficial for OWCD.
Okay,
I'll work with whoever.
all right. What is is there a mandatory deadline that we have to respond to this? We passed it.
Well, yeah, we'll just respond. They don't have the data to complete their review unless they go forward to their board and say, well, we didn't get everything and here's what we've got. And we're gonna publish it, but I think it's important that OBGMA do look at this document and provide a response to each of those agencies. And maybe we need to give a timeline as when some of that information that's deficient will be available.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if we respond that way and then get a schedule together on how we're gonna do this.
Yeah, we'll bring it forth and with, at the March.
Yeah, okay.
Meeting. And then see where we're at.
Any other comments by the board? Any comments by the public?
Well, I would like to say I know Michelle, who's gonna be the new bookkeeper. She's been a very good, reliable bookkeeping person in Ojai for many, many years.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next item.
Excuse me, would you like this item then brought back next meeting? I'm thinking maybe
Yes.
we should at least put a list together of deficient items.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and any of the corrections we can make, and the corrections that Russ submitted, and I think Bob had a few too, so. Okay, the next, well application from Greta, Mertz.
This particular permit, and we probably got a few others at this point, they're kind of languishing out there because, number one, I just haven't been able to get to them. But this particular one, based upon the information that's been submitted, it appears that it's going to require the property owner to meet some of the conditions of the governor's executive order. And the governor did come out and revised its executive order, but for the most part, it's pretty much the same. I think they got a little more definition about replacement wells within that. In this particular applicant, the governor's order says that if the well is less than 2 acre-feet and for domestic purposes or municipal purposes, then it's exempt from the executive order. The application before you tonight is for a well that's 2 acre-feet and for pasture irrigation. So I don't believe that meets the domestic criteria. So I think my recommendation would be go back to the well owner and tell them that they're gonna have to meet the conditions under the executive order, which means for OBGMA, we've done this once already. We had DUDEC do a report that looks at how that well could impact the sustainability of the groundwater sustainability plan within the basin. Any comments?
Sure. Wasn't the governor's order meant to prevent more pastures and things and limit it in a drought to actual, in-house use. The other thing that's kind of interesting, while I've not been here long, I've only seen one well come through here that was over the magic 2 acre feet. And how do we know it's 2 acre feet? Do we do an audit after a year? Do they have to be metered when they go in? How do we have a responsibility even to regulate that or to follow up on it?
Well, I think that's part of what's going to have to go in the future. In the past, we had an application, and prior to the governor's order, it really didn't matter. We got the application, and it was pretty much approved, no matter what the use was for. Since the executive orders come forward, now there's these conditions that not only the property owner has to meet through OBGMA, and we have to certify certain things if the well is not for domestic use and it's 2 acre feet or higher. But also they have to meet conditions of the county, which the county is the permitting agency, so that the property owner has to then provide also another report that shows the well will not create interference to adjacent wells. So that process, Trevor, do you remember, was that like $5,000 for that report just from you guys?
Whoa.
From us, it was less than that. I think it was more on the order of
Maybe 2,500? Was it 20?
Yeah.
Okay, 20. So, the property owner could be into this for $5,000 to $7,500, depending on how much the reports cost. But we don't have a choice at this point.
And let's say everything's granted and it goes through, and at the end of the year, 3 acre feet is used. What's the process? Is there a penalty? Is there a process, an adjustment? What happens?
And that's what's going to happen. As part of the grant application, we put something in there for trying to get all meters installed within the wells, especially the ones that don't have them. And I think as part of that, there then can start to be an audit process that looks at that and looks at the application. But then the board's going to have to decide, okay, well, if they're exceeding their application amount, what are you going to do? Are you going to restrict them? And of course, you don't have any regulations related to that at this point. So down the road, I think there's going to have to be some requirements that establish the board's authority to restrict pumping if they exceed what they've submitted and requested, especially if it's for domestic use and it's less than 2 acre feet and they're using it for something else and they're using more water. But it's a process at this point.
I mean, I just find it hard for somebody to use 2 acre feet for domestic. That's a lot of water. That's a lot of water.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
And so I'm pretty skeptical, and I would like to see us come up with a set of what we're going to do. But I would hope that anybody putting in a new well is required to put a meter in with that well.
Well, we already have that regulation in place.
And we have regulations where we can audit it and take a look at it every year and look at the reading. Okay.
Biggest challenge is, in some cases, getting access to the property, because it's not always clear that we have the right to enter on the property, even if we have an ordinance. So that's another issue that has to get addressed. Most of the time, I think 99% of the time, people are going to voluntarily allow the agency in there. But
Yeah, I think we have to remember the 2 acre feet is an arbitrary number. It's really not based on anything sound.
For this year.
This year.
For this
yeah.
year. Next year will be different.
For a new permit, I assume you can make access for monitoring purposes a condition of issuing the permit.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I would agree.
And I guess my other question is, in addition to, regulatory restrictive type of measures, when they exceed the amount of the permit, the amount of pumping from the permit, is it possible to have fines that would support our monitoring efforts?
Yes, I think at some point, certainly setting regulations to have fines. Another option is providing flow restriction, limits the amount of water that they can use out of the well. It's a little problematic because it takes some work to get that done.
Yeah, we haven't done that at all, so, that's another leap
Yeah, it is.
to do that. But, as we go forward with this GSP, that may be something we're gonna have to addressed.
Well, then, let me follow up with a different answer, or a different question to get a different answer. What's gonna happen if she comes in here, which is fine with me, and says, I'm gonna use 3 or 4 acre feet of water? Then what's the threshold? I'm just not liking the solid, everything's 2 acre feet of water,
Well,
and
it's le-
everything's not 2
That's-
acre feet of water.
It's less
That's
than,
the rule.
it's less than 2 acre feet, so if they use 2 acre feet, which her application says 2 acre feet.
Oh, no, I'm not talking about her. I'm talking about, we get a new application, they say they're gonna use 3 or 4 acre feet of water. They're over that 2 acre foot standard. Then what's the process? What do they run into?
Well,
What do we have to do?
The process right now, based upon the executive order, and
The new one.
absent any regulations from OBGMA, says that you have to provide, it says the Groundwater Sustainability Agency has to make a determination that the well will not
Impact.
reduce the sustainability of the basin. And the problem that I have a little bit with that is we're gonna see these applications one-on-one, and it's not a cumulative effect. And so at some point, if you don't look at the cumulative effect, which it may take years, you're not gonna really know when that threshold's when you're not gonna meet the sustainability of the basin anymore. I liken the whole process to what county or city planning agencies used to do. They used to come in, when I worked in the city, they'd come in and say, oh, this development, tell us whether it's gonna have an impact on your water system. Well, but they'd ask that same question for each individual. They wouldn't look at on a totality basis. And so I think part of the problem the agency's gonna face is you need to look at this totality, or it's gonna end up being the next person through the door is the one that's not gonna get a permit. Because we're gonna say we can't absorb any more of these in the future. So it's not a clean process. I don't like it. The governor has not given us really quite good guidance on this process in my mind, and DWR has followed up with some information, but it's still, the agency's gonna have to come in and say, I believe you're gonna have to say, you're either gonna allow all wells, or you're gonna allow some wells, or you're gonna allow a certain threshold, or you're gonna have to come up with something that defines where you think that stopping point is.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to monitor the use. I mean, if we start to exceed the sustainable yield, then we have a problem.
Yeah, and based on the numbers from this last year, we're under it. But
Yeah.
we have had years where we pump, the sustainable yield's 41 acre feet, but 4,100 acre feet. We've had yields where the basin has pumped 5,500, 6,000 acre feet.
6,000,
Maybe even higher, if I recall.
Yeah.
But I think I read it probably different than anybody else here. Because domestic users at 2 acre feet, that is a domestic user for the most part. And I grant you, if they had just put yard, to me, that, yard and grass, that would be their domestic use. And now, I grant you that given the way the order's written, it needs to be 1.9, because obviously they're trying to comply with that, which, and I'm not quite sure where it's costing and what their geology is, but my guess is it's $75,000 to $100,000 to drill this well nowadays. There just aren't that many people that for 2 acre feet are gonna spend those dollars and have the right geology underneath that allows it and the like. So I don't think it is an infinite pool of people that will be coming in to circumvent something in this manner. I think it's a very minute thing, and if that stays the same and the cost of drilling a well doesn't or continues to escalate, it's going to be a smaller population and a smaller population.
It'll be self-correcting.
It'll be self-limiting, yes.
But at this point, I'd recommend we need at least send a letter to the property owner and say, based upon the governor's order, it doesn't appear your application can be approved. It's exempt from the order, and here's what you're gonna have to do.
And we'll see it again at 1.9.
Yeah.
Well, but even then,
That's what I'm saying.
unless it lists domestic use,
Right.
and, you know, I mean, it's kind of hard to come back in and say, well, okay, we're gonna change the whole application, we're gonna go to domestic use, we're gonna be
No,
1.9, and then you say, well, what happened before? Why the big change?
And I would say if it were me, because I'm complying with the governor's order, I'm now gonna put a spigot at the house. I mean, if the governor writes it that way, they can fit through the keyhole. I don't see a problem.
Well, they can fit through the keyhole. I guess the issue is, I mean, they didn't say they were gonna use it for their house. They said pasture.
No, I grant you.
Yeah. So it depends on how much follow-through the board wants to have on these kind of issues, but we'll send a letter, tell them what they gotta do, and then we'll see what happens.
Okay. Nate B will solve it for you.
Any comments by the public? Okay, we'll move to item number 7E, which is retaining bookkeeper services.
Yes, a few months ago, we were notified that the bookkeeper that we had was moving out of the area, and she has actually moved. As I recall, she lives in Thousand Oaks now, and wanted to not continue providing services anymore. Unfortunately, she did provide a name, and I think I spoke to you last meeting that we went ahead and engaged this woman, even without a contract, because we need to get some bookkeeping done. So with that in mind, this is the formal process to bring her on board and to use her. And based upon the work that she's done so far, it sounds like she's as good, if not better, than the prior bookkeeper. And the prior bookkeeper was really good too. So, yeah, very smart, very knowledgeable. So we recommend approval on this contract.
Comments with the board?
So John, I have no idea what we were paying our prior one. Looks like this one's $50 an hour.
It was 35 before, if I remember.
Okay, so we're gonna escalate 30%. How much time are we talking about? Because if it's not that much time, then the increase in cost is negligible. I mean, do we need 10 hours a month? We need 10 hours a week? What
I
kind
think
of?
Typically, the prior bookkeeper came in about once a month and worked less than a day. Yeah.
Less than 10 hours.
Less than 10 hours a month. There might be the occasional contact.
I
you know.
probably will go up to help with the auditing report, but it's totally worth it. And Renee said too, she's already awesome. In fact, they were working together today. Melissa's.
Do we need a motion to approve hiring?
Yes.
I make a motion, we approve to hire.
Second?
Call the roll.
Director Daddy?
Yes.
Director Thielke?
Yes.
Director Whitman?
Yes.
Director Finch?
Yes.
And Chair Hages?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, next item is our financial reports for January.
I'll just be briefly on that. Because this is the first time I've seen them actually. It looks like our net income went up about a little over 32,000, so our balance at the end of January is almost $120,000. And that's because we've been receiving extraction charge revenue, so we expect to, I don't know how much more that's gonna go up, but so far that's where we're at this month, or last month, I should say. This number seems a little low so far for the first quarter, and it may be because we don't have all the extraction statements, but for the first quarter of 22-23, we're showing 549 acre feet being extracted from the basin. My guess is that's because we don't have all the reports in.
It's because it rained.
And it's rained.
It rained in
Could be rain.
True.
It rained in November and December 3rd.
Yeah, that's true.
I think I think you've got
Okay.
the bulk.
We're not gonna get much in the next one either.
And you're gonna, agricultural will be next to zero in the next one.
Yeah, well, that's probably true. And then pardon me, I know there were some expenditures I wanted to mention briefly, but I don't, Roberta, I lost it. But I think the major expenditures we had for the January time period were for your cure services, cure groundwater, and then for Roberta's time. Oh, here it is. Yeah. Cure groundwater and the bookkeeper and Roberta. And then, of course, we pay rent every month at $800 per month. I think those are the main, and then, of course, you've got your IRS and Employment Development Department, so those are taxes.
And John, on this other page, lower left, 3966 was the total extraction for last year, for the 21-22 year.
30, I saw.
3766.
3766.
3766, and yeah, it was a little different than what Devin had put up on his table earlier, but it was just probably with, less than 50 acre-feet difference.
But I mean, this is pretty accurate.
That's pretty accurate. Yeah.
We're 10% below our sustainability of 4,100
We were over
annual extraction.
Yeah, we were over 4,000 acre-feet the year before.
And this year, I doubt you're just barely gonna be over 3,200, I would bet.
Our invoice also is a 2-month.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So
Yeah, Kier's invoice for January was 2 months, so,
January and December.
yeah. That's all I
Any other
have.
comments on the financial reports?
Just like a motion to accept the reports.
Make a motion to accept.
Second?
Call the roll?
Director
Yes.
Finch,
Yes.
Director Daddy,
Yes.
Director Thielke,
Yes.
Director Whitman,
Yes?
and Chair Hages.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item is the discussion items. I don't know if these are in the right order, John.
Well, that's what you can switch them all around if you'd like.
Well, unfortunately, John is going to retire, fortunately for him. And, he's done a great job over the years for sometimes this very difficult organization with all the regulations and requirements that we have to go through for such a small organization. But, I really appreciate what John's done. And when he told me he was going to retire, I was trying to think about what we could do in a relatively short period of time to find someone who's familiar with everything that we do and is capable of handling particularly the regulatory element of this. And so Jim and I talked about maybe asking Casitas if they could help us out with providing general manager services, at least in the interim, to give both Casitas an idea of the level of effort and to give our board an opportunity to see how satisfied we were with that arrangement. And I talked to Mike Flood, the manager at Casitas, about having someone serve as our general manager. And Julie Aranda is the Casitas' engineering department manager, and she does an excellent job. I think she has the right tools for this. Some of the work I've seen, she's very detail-oriented and has what it takes to deal with the state and the county and the various regulators. She's managed a lot of major projects. So I don't think she was too thrilled about the idea at first, but I think Mike talked her into it. But anyway, what we're proposing is to have her work with John. John actually used to work with her, so they know each other, and get familiar with where we're at and what we have to do, so that we can keep this thing rolling. And then
When I was general manager of Las Verdes Water, Julie had worked there as an engineer, and she is, Director Hages indicated she's very detail-oriented, and she does really good work. She's got some time, a few years in with private consultants as well as public agencies. So I would highly recommend it at some point if the board has to make a decision.
yeah, so they're willing to jump in now and help us out and get us through this stage until we can have some kind of formal arrangement with them.
What's the retirement date?
Well, I gave Richard a letter that was April 1st. A couple of reasons for that. One, that doesn't mean I'm just going to walk away. Quite frankly, I like doing this. And I haven't billed you guys since last year sometime. It shows you how much I like it. It's not like I need the money, but I've had a couple challenges with my health this year or last year, and I feel like I'm slowing down a little bit, and I don't feel like I can provide the effort that I need to, that the board in this community and the agency deserve. So, but that doesn't mean I'm just walk away. So I'll continue to offer whatever assistance I can in meetings and providing background and support where I can. But I just want to get out of the requirement of making sure I do all the board stuff. And it's not that difficult. But
Having a consistent time frame, a deadline to meet, right?
yeah.
So Chair, are we going to borrow, reimburse, hire? How is this? She'll continue to work for Casitas. She'll be on loan.
Yes, she
and
will
There'll be a
be.
per diem or some type of a arrangement.
Yeah, she'll be an employee of Casitas Water District. And, we're trying to get an idea of what kind of, level of effort. I've estimated, and John agreed, it's probably about 10 hours a month. Probably be more than that initially, but we need someone who is our formal contact with the state on this GSP. So she's quite capable of doing that. And, we just didn't have enough time to really get together a formal agreement or anything. And giving Casitas an opportunity to see how much effort this is going to be, because Julia runs a considerable amount of projects at Casitas, and they're not exactly have a surplus of help there. So
I see this a lot like one of my roles at Las Verdes as general manager is not only did we run a water agency, but we also ran a joint powers authority with Triumphal Sanitation District. And so Las Verdes management and staff supported that joint powers authority, and the joint powers authority ended up paying for that support of the management and operations and things like that. So I see this very similar, just on a much lower scale.
Jim?
As I had talked to Richard, and I think it's a great, hopefully long-term plan, but definitely a short-term fill-in. But more why I pushed the button was to thank John for what you've done. You stepped in at a time when this thing went from a simple thing to a complicated thing, and you helped uncomplicate it to as much a degree as it can be uncomplicated. So I want to thank you more than anything, but I'm definitely in favor of this.
Yeah, this is the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency is kind of similar. It's much larger as far as the number of pumpers they have, but the way they've operated over the years is they contract with the county, who is a member of the GMA. They contract with the county for their geologist, for a manager. I think they even use the county council. But so it's not unusual for an organization like this to do that. And I think it's probably far more efficient. And even, I talked to Jim about the Conservation District. I mean, they have some of the similar issues. They can't go out and hire a general manager for, the amount of time that they would need one. Anyway, again, this isn't something permanent at this point. This is a kind of have each party kind of feel it out and see what they think before we come up with some formal agreement.
Yeah. I'll also thank John. Haven't been here long, but liked what I've seen so far. And I have no problem with approving us doing this on the short term and examining what it's going to mean long term.
Do you need something for the short term?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Not today, but I'll continue to work with the board chair and probably going to meet with Casitas and talk about things, and I'll share whatever information I need to do, and some point bring back a recommendation to you.
And from time to time, drop in and tell us where you've been vacationing and what you've been doing of globetrotting.
And that's part of another thing. April 23rd, I'm off to the United Kingdom for 24 days, so. Sorry.
Good for
sorry.
you. Good for you.
The only great thing about it is the UK does have telephone service, email, texting.
Well, and I can actually understand them a little bit.
And it's cold then. It's really cold.
Yeah, I know. Can't be any more cold than it's been here this year.
Yeah. Anyway, I definitely would like to thank John. I worked with John. John and I worked together when he was with the city of Ventura and I was at Casitas. We're kind of the opposite sides of the table there.
37 years ago.
Yeah, 37 years ago. And I've kept in contact with him when he went to Las Virgenes and I was over in Camarillo. So I've known him for a long time. And this district was very fortunate to get his assistance.
I just wish I could have provided more, given you more time, more effort, but, you know, it's just, I knew getting through the groundwater sustainability plan was what had to be done.
Yes.
And then I think now's the perfect time for transition.
All right, thank you.
Well done.
Yeah. Okay. Bob? Okay, no other comments? The meeting is adjourned at 4:35. Close enough.